Have you ever considered that your greatest suffering might come not from life's chaos, but from your desperate attempt to control it? Not just the external circumstances, your work, your relationships, your future, but the internal demand that everything must be certain, predictable, and understood. Modern society has conditioned you to believe that security lies in control, that peace comes from knowing exactly what will happen next. But what if this very belief is the source of your deepest unrest? Perhaps you are exhausted from trying to force life into neat categories, from building plans that crumble the moment reality asserts itself. Maybe you live in a perpetual state of anxiety, where every unknown feels like a threat, where the unpredictable seems like an enemy to be conquered. But what if the problem isn't the uncertainty itself? What if the real source of suffering is your resistance to it? 2,000 years ago, a teacher walked the dusty roads of Galilee speaking words that would echo through millennia. Jesus of Nazareth offered a radical teaching that challenged the very foundation of human anxiety. "Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow," he said. "They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these." This wasn't poetry for the sake of beauty. It was a revolutionary invitation to a different way of being in the world. What Jesus understood, and what the Essene communities practiced in their desert settlements near the Dead Sea, was a profound truth. Life flows when we stop trying to dam it. The Essenes, those mystical seekers who lived in simplicity and contemplation, documented their wisdom in scrolls that would remain hidden for nearly 2 millennia. Their texts speak of surrender not as defeat, but as alignment with the divine flow of existence. In this exploration, I want to show you a path that ancient wisdom has always known, but that we have forgotten in our modern obsession with control. Through the teachings of Jesus, the practices of the Essenes, and insights from depth psychology and spiritual traditions, I want to reveal how surrendering to life's unpredictability doesn't lead to chaos, but to something you've been seeking all along: freedom and simplicity. But be prepared. This isn't about positive thinking or superficial comfort. This is about a fundamental shift in how you relate to existence itself. And it begins the moment you stop fighting and start trusting. Are you ready? Because this journey starts with the most liberating and terrifying words you can speak. "Thy will be done, not mine." Jesus was not a philosopher who taught from a position of comfort and control. He was a man who lived the very uncertainty he preached. He had no permanent home. Foxes have holes, and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. He owned nothing. He planned nothing in the way we understand planning. He moved with the moment, responded to what arose, and trusted completely in what he called the Father's will. This was not recklessness, it was radical surrender, and it produced a quality of being that people recognized as freedom. When Jesus spoke, he spoke with an authority that didn't come from credentials or certainty about outcomes, but from complete alignment with the present moment. He demonstrated that when you stop clinging to security, something else emerges: presence, power, peace. The Essenes understood this principle deeply. Their community at Qumran, revealed to us through the Dead Sea Scrolls, was built on a foundation of surrender to divine order. They called it the Way. They believed that human suffering came from walking against the current of divine flow, from imposing personal will over cosmic will. Their manual of discipline teaches, "I will not dispute the decrees of God's truth, nor find fault with his ordinances." This wasn't blind submission to an external authority. It was recognition of a fundamental truth. Reality operates according to laws we did not create and cannot change. Carl Jung, the great depth psychologist of the 20th century, recognized this same principle in his concept of the self. Jung understood that the ego, our conscious identity, is like a small boat on a vast ocean. The ego wants to believe it controls the journey, but true wisdom comes when we recognize that we are being carried by currents far deeper than our personal will. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Surrender, in Jung's framework, is not giving up personal responsibility, but aligning the ego with the deeper self, the organizing principle of the psyche. What all these traditions are pointing to is the same liberation. When you stop trying to be the author of existence and instead become a participant in it, life becomes simpler. Not easier, necessarily, but simpler. The complexity dissolves when you're no longer fighting against what is. You try to control your life, don't you? Your schedule, your emotions, other people's responses, your future. And the more you grasp, the more anxious you become. This is not a flaw in your character. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of how life works. Jesus taught this explicitly. Which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? He wasn't being rhetorical. He was pointing to a truth. Anxiety about the future accomplishes nothing except the destruction of the present. The Essene texts contain a teaching they called the two spirits. They believed that within every human being exists a struggle between the spirit of truth and the spirit of deceit. The spirit of deceit whispers that you must control everything to be safe. That certainty is possible, that you can protect yourself from life's unpredictability through enough planning, enough effort, enough vigilance. The spirit of truth reveals that this is an illusion, that safety comes not from control, but from trust. Modern psychology confirms what these ancient teachers knew. The attempt to control what cannot be controlled is the root of anxiety disorders, obsessive thinking, and chronic stress. When you believe that your well-being depends on managing every variable, you create an impossible task for yourself. And then you suffer twice. Once from the challenges life naturally presents, and again from your resistance to those challenges. Jung called this the problem of the ego's inflation. The ego believes it is more powerful than it actually is. It thinks it can dictate terms to reality. But reality does not negotiate, and so the inflated ego exhausts itself in a futile battle, creating what Jung termed neurosis, the internal conflict between what we want to be true and what actually is true. Jesus demonstrated another way. When faced with his own crucifixion, he prayed, "Not my will, but yours be done." This wasn't resignation to suffering. It was the ultimate act of surrender to reality. He didn't pretend the coming ordeal wasn't painful. He asked for it to pass. But he didn't make his peace dependent on getting what he wanted. His peace came from complete acceptance of what would be. The Essenes practiced this daily. Their scrolls describe elaborate rituals of surrender, moments throughout the day where they would consciously release their personal agendas and realign with divine will. They understood that the human tendency is to drift into ego-centered control, and that freedom requires constant return to surrender. Have you noticed how the moments you feel most anxious are precisely the moments you're trying hardest to control an outcome? The job interview, the relationship conversation, the medical diagnosis. You're not anxious about what is. You're anxious about your inability to guarantee what will be. And that anxiety doesn't help. It only makes you suffer before anything has actually happened. Jesus called this tomorrow's trouble. He said, "Do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble." This isn't encouragement to be passive or irresponsible. It's an invitation to distinguish between what you can actually influence and what you cannot. To act where action is called for, and to surrender where control is an illusion. But how do you actually do this? How do you surrender when every instinct screams at you to hold on tighter? The ancient teachings offer not just philosophy, but practice. Concrete ways to train your mind and heart to release what cannot be held. Jesus taught through parables because abstract concepts don't transform us. Stories do. Practice does. He told his followers about a merchant who found a pearl of great value and sold everything to possess it. The pearl represents the kingdom of God, which Jesus described as both within you and at hand. It's available now, in this moment, but only when you're willing to release everything else. Surrender isn't about losing. It's about recognizing what truly matters and letting go of what doesn't. The Essenes were even more specific in their practices. The Dead Sea Scrolls reveal daily rituals of purification, not just of the body, but of the mind. They practiced what they called examining the spirit, a form of self-observation where they would honestly assess where they were resisting divine flow, where they were imposing their will, where they were clinging to outcomes. This wasn't self-criticism. It was self-awareness in service of surrender. Jung developed a similar practice he called active imagination. He taught his patients to observe their thoughts and feelings without identifying with them, to witness the movements of the psyche without trying to control them. In doing so, they discovered that much of what they thought was them was actually autonomous processes unfolding according to their own logic. The ego's job wasn't to control these processes, but to relate to them consciously. Here are practices drawn from these traditions that can transform your relationship with uncertainty. First, practice the pause. Jesus often withdrew to solitary places to pray. This wasn't escape. It was recalibration. The Essenes built this into their daily rhythm with morning and evening prayers of surrender. Create moments in your day, even brief ones, where you consciously stop trying to manage everything. Breathe. Acknowledge that in this moment, you are not in control of the universe. And notice that despite this, you are still here, still breathing, still held by existence itself. Second, observe your attachments. The Buddha, whose teachings influenced the spiritual climate of Jesus' time, taught that suffering comes from attachment. When you notice anxiety rising, ask yourself, what am I trying to control right now? What outcome am I clinging to? Simply naming the attachment begins to loosen its grip. The Essenes practiced detachment not through suppression, but through recognition. They knew that you cannot surrender what you haven't first acknowledged you're holding. Third, practice the prayer of relinquishment. Jesus taught, "Thy kingdom come, thy will be done." This isn't asking an external deity to intervene. It's a declaration of surrender to reality as it unfolds. Create your own version of this prayer. It might be as simple as, I release my need to control this outcome. I trust the process. Speak it aloud when you feel anxiety rising. The Essenes understood that spoken word has power. It makes the internal external and creates commitment. Fourth, embrace not knowing as sacred. The Essene texts speak of mysteries that cannot be fully understood by the human mind. Rather than seeing this as a problem, they saw it as an invitation to humility. Jung wrote extensively about the importance of maintaining what he called the numinous, the sense of mystery and awe before existence. When you encounter something you cannot understand or control, instead of forcing comprehension, allow yourself to say, I don't know, and rest in that space. Fifth, find your community of surrender. The Essenes didn't practice in isolation. They created intentional communities where everyone was committed to the same path. You cannot walk this journey alone. Find people who understand the difference between surrender and defeat, who support you in letting go rather than encouraging you to grip tighter. This might be a spiritual community, a therapy group, or even one trusted friend who gets it. Finally, practice the discipline of gratitude. Jesus constantly gave thanks, even before miracles occurred. The Essenes had elaborate prayers of thanksgiving woven throughout their day. Gratitude is surrender in action. When you give thanks for what is, rather than lamenting what isn't, you align yourself with reality. You stop fighting. And in that moment of acceptance, something shifts. Not externally, but within you. What all these practices point toward is a fundamental reorientation of consciousness. Instead of being a warrior battling life, you become a dancer moving with it. And this shift, this surrender, produces something precious: freedom. But this isn't the freedom we usually think of. The freedom to do whatever we want. It's something deeper. It's freedom from the tyranny of your own demands, from the exhausting requirement that life conform to your expectations, from the constant anxiety that comes from believing your well-being depends on controlling the uncontrollable. Jesus spoke of this as the easy yoke. He said, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." A yoke is a tool of surrender. It aligns you with a power greater than yourself. And paradoxically, this alignment creates ease where resistance created struggle. The Essenes experienced this freedom in their desert community. Despite living in harsh conditions with minimal possessions, their writings speak of profound joy and peace. They had surrendered the illusion of security that comes from accumulation and control, and in its place found a security that came from trust. They knew they were part of something larger than themselves, held by something that didn't require their management. Jung observed this phenomenon in his patients. Those who could surrender their ego's demands and align with what he called the self experienced what he termed individuation. They became more fully themselves, not by imposing their will on their psyche, but by cooperating with the deeper currents moving within them. They found freedom not through control, but through surrender to their own deeper nature. This freedom has a quality that is unmistakable: simplicity. When you stop fighting reality, life becomes simpler. Not easier, perhaps, but simpler. You're no longer maintaining the exhausting complexity of resistance. You respond to what comes. You do what you can. You release what you cannot change. And you discover that this is enough. Jesus lived this simplicity. He had no strategic plan for changing the world. He responded to what arose. He healed when healing was needed. He taught when people were ready to hear. He withdrew when withdrawal was called for. And through this responsive spontaneity, he changed the course of human history, not by controlling outcomes, but by surrendering to the moment. The Essenes structured their entire community around this principle. Their scrolls reveal detailed regulations, but beneath the rules was a commitment to flow with divine order rather than impose human order. They created structure not to control life, but to create space for surrender. When you surrender to life's unpredictability, you don't become passive. You become responsive. You act when action is called for, but you don't confuse action with control. You plan when planning is helpful, but you hold your plans lightly. You care deeply about outcomes, but you don't make your peace dependent on getting the outcomes you want. This is the freedom that mystics across traditions have discovered. The freedom to be fully alive in this moment, without being imprisoned by fear of the next moment. The freedom to love without guarantee of return. The freedom to act without certainty of success. The freedom to be yourself without needing validation from external circumstances. If you've come this far, something in you recognizes this truth. You've felt the weight of trying to control everything. You've experienced the anxiety that comes from demanding certainty in an uncertain world. And some part of you is ready to release that burden. But knowing intellectually that surrender is wise doesn't make it easy to practice. Your conditioning runs deep. Society tells you that control is strength, that surrender is weakness, that certainty is possible if you just try hard enough. Every advertisement, every self-help message, every cultural narrative reinforces the illusion that you can and should manage every aspect of your existence. The path Jesus walked, the way the Essenes practiced, the freedom Jung described, all of it requires something from you. Courage. Not the courage to fight and conquer, but the courage to let go and trust. And this courage is built through practice, through daily choices to release rather than grasp, to trust rather than demand, to flow rather than force. Start small. You don't have to surrender everything at once. Notice one area where you're trying to control an outcome today. Just one. Maybe it's a conversation you're worried about, or a decision someone else needs to make, or your anxiety about the future. In that one area, practice release. Say to yourself, to reality, to the divine presence that holds all things, I surrender my need to control this. I trust what will unfold. And then notice what happens. Not externally, necessarily. The circumstances might not change, but something within you will shift. The knot of anxiety will loosen slightly. You'll breathe a bit deeper. You'll find a moment of peace, not because everything is certain, but because you've stopped demanding certainty. This is the beginning. From this small practice, you can expand. You can learn to live more and more from this place of surrender, from this trust in the flow of existence. And as you do, you'll discover what the ancient teachers promised, that surrender doesn't lead to chaos, but to order, not to weakness, but to strength, not to loss, but to gain. Jesus said, "Whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it." This paradox is at the heart of surrender. When you release your death grip on life, when you stop trying to save yourself through control, you find the life you were seeking all along. Not a life free from challenge, but a life free from the suffering of resistance. The Essenes spent their days in practices of surrender and their nights in contemplation of divine mysteries. They knew that the path was not walked once, but walked continuously, moment by moment, choice by choice. They knew that surrender is not a destination, but a direction, not an achievement, but a practice. Jung spent his life helping people find this integration, this alignment between the small self and the larger self. He knew that the goal wasn't to eliminate the ego, but to put it in right relationship with the deeper forces of the psyche. He knew that wholeness comes not from control, but from conscious participation in the mystery of your own unfolding. So the question isn't whether you can surrender to life's unpredictability. The question is whether you will. Whether you'll take the risk of releasing your grip. Whether you'll walk the path that every wisdom tradition has pointed toward. The path that leads through surrender to freedom, through acceptance to peace, through trust to simplicity. What are you holding on to right now that you know deep down you cannot control? What outcome are you demanding that life must provide for you to be okay? What uncertainty are you resisting with all your strength? Pause and feel it. Name it. And then, just for this moment, practice letting go. Tell me in the comments, what would change in your life if you truly surrendered to what you cannot control? What are you afraid would happen if you stopped fighting? Share your truth. This conversation matters, and your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. If this exploration has resonated with you, don't stop here. Subscribe to this channel for more wisdom from ancient traditions applied to modern life. The journey of surrender is not walked alone, and I'm here to walk it with you, exploring the teachings that have guided seekers for thousands of years. You've already begun. The fact that you're here, reading these words, considering this path, means something in you is ready. Honor that readiness. Feed it, practice it, and discover for yourself what the ancient teachers knew. That when we surrender to life's unpredictability, we don't lose ourselves. We find ourselves. We find freedom. We find simplicity. We find peace.